I'm excited today for this podcast with David Verdesi, the spiritual anthropologist. This is part one of a four-part series with David. David grew up starting at the age of 3 that he could remember having daily mystic visions that put him into trance state. At the age of 14, he left home in Italy and went to Taiwan on his first stop in search of their meaning, and then traveled all over the world for 30 years, researching and comparing his own experiences with those of over 120 mystics, yogis, cave dwellers, saints, and genuine enlightened beings, siddhas from the mountains and jungles of India, and Xi'an immortals from China and Southeast Asia, the shamans of Central and South America and Africa, and the mystics of old Europe, and the mysterious saints of the northern steppes of Russia, Tibet, and Mongolia. His adventure has been amazing. It's been captured on a 3-part video series and many, many interviews, but no one's interviewed him like we're doing. David's training and experiences have given him a deep understanding of the individuation process, altered states of consciousness that lead to realization and wholeness. Like I said, this is part one of the series. I hope you'll enjoy it. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel and support. Hit the share button. Leave your comments below. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the Transformations Podcast. Here, guests and I will share our transformative experiences and we'll explore how to find excellence in life. David Verdesi, thank you so much for coming on the Transformations Podcast today. I really appreciate you making the time for us.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. And I guess this meeting and probably this chat has been a long time coming.
It has for sure.
Our common friend who brought us together.
Yeah, Rene Navarro, we both known him for so long. And he's like a friend, Sifu, big brother to both of us, you know. But like we're his two sons. Godfather. So, you know, there's so much in your history and your past that we share parallel a little bit in our passions and our studies and our travels, but you've gone deeper and in a bunch of areas, and I went deeper in different areas. So I'm very interested in kind of talking to you. And Renee's told me 800,000 things about you along the way. So I want to just, probe some questions because I'm really interested in what drives people to do things, So I know what happens to me in early life that made me really at 9 years old with a passion begin searching for martial arts and traditional healers, So what is it about your early life that just stimulated this idea? Hey, I need to go meditate and levitate.
Well, straightforward. I was kind of plagued by visions from a very early age, and pretty much since 3-4 years old. I mean, according to the records that my grandmother kept of my strange childhood, I was raised by her, not by my father and mother. And I had this very dominant vision that would, happen, during, normal daily activities. And so as a child and my grandmother, I would just, sort of freeze and enter into these things for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And very often I would wake up and my grandmother told me, she found me, sitting, cross-legged, and I would tell her all the things that I saw in the vision. Mostly are the things that I had to do in this life, the teacher that I had to meet, and the practice I had to finish. And I didn't finish to do this, and I had to continue to do that. And they were so real and defining to me, which I never questioned them. Kind of bald-headed monks, which I never had the chance to see. Most of them were Asians, and the reality of the vision was so that you cannot distinguish it from the actual reality. So there was a period that my grandmother was also a bit worried. There was also some kind of a psychosis or a depersonalization or anything like that. But I was, other than that, very healthy. And they didn't seem to be destructive opposite. I would just by myself, sit there and meditate and recall this light, this sense of luminosity, and the stabilization of this light was sort of a common theme, something that I had to finish to do, right?
Mm.
And so it really started like this. So I cannot really tell you why, but it started like that. Some people call it past lives, maybe, I have no idea, but they were definitely very real to me. Um, and then in parallel, I was raised in a Christian school, um, although my grandmother was an atheist, so there was no religious education at home at all. But it just happened to be a very good school, okay, where members of my family have been sort of raised into for many generations. So I just went there, but not for the religious thing, right? And so every morning before going to class, we had to go to church, which for a lot of children was like a torture and boring. For me, was ecstasy, because I had visions and the voices of God. And again, I would kind of end up transfixed, the eyes rolled up, and remaining like this. They had to come and pick me up and shake me, and it was cause of concern, and blah 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 blah. But I was just in my ecstasies, right? And that's how it started. So I don't know how it started. It just, it's part of my life since I can remember. And then everything else was a bit of a conspiracy that kind of led me where I wanted and needed to go, right? So, Italy was, especially at the time, a very mono-ethnic society. So you would only see Italians. You would not see, like in the US, or in the UK, you see, blacks and Arabs and Asians, and that didn't exist in Italy, right? And so it just happened to be that the year, when I was in school, there was sort of the first Chinese family, and it attracted a lot of attention, And so, for whatever reason, I made friends with these kids, and then, um, you know, one day the mother came and picked them up, and I was like so attracted to this Asian lady, and became friend with the kids. I mean, long story short, their father was the first acupuncturist in Italy, and he was the personal acupuncturist of our president, the president of the Italian Republic at the time. And the mother was the director of the Beijing Opera in Taiwan, so she was actually an accomplished martial artist and Qigong master. And so I find myself, uh, with this, the friendship with this family, and so sort of being immersed in this culture, in these practices, in a very private settings, and this whole kind of thing just kept going, and so I started to see the first demonstrations of Qi, although, and what is interesting, my early visions and memories, they were not about martial arts or anything. They were like purely meditative, or like, but for whatever reason, then as a kid, I found myself immersed into this martial family. And of course, you get the enthusiasm as a boy. And so there was always this intermingling, and then I started to do martial arts with them. And then, blah, blah, blah. I met my early teachers very early on. And so one thing led to another. And so it started with sort of mystical visions, more like monastic or yogic-like memories.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of morphed into, the martial aspect. Although I was never interested in fighting, really, I was always interested in the internal aspect of the martial arts. So you finish your martial arts, and the meditation, or the qigong, or the focusing on the tantien, and whatever. So that was always the thing. I was, never interested in throwing punches, really. Although, I mean, logically, you learn that along the way, right?
Yeah.
And then, I kind of spend a lot of time then researching, and sorry, researching it was a bit early for research, but with the passion of, the secrets locked into these mysterious movements and forms and routines and choreographies that, somehow I believed, and that, somehow into this specific set, there were like hidden secrets and gems to unlock your inner power and so on and so on. And so, one thing led to another, really, and I found myself very young, at 14 years old, leaving home.
Wow.
My grandmother was a military woman, so she raised me in a very strict way, and as a military, pretty much. And so at 14, she told me, "You are a man. It's time you go your own way. Bye bye." That's it. She gave me a ticket and a little money, and I was gone. Okay, so
Your grandma. Where did she send you with that ticket, and what did she expect you to do when you got there?
Yeah, I went to Taiwan because
Okay.
I met a Chinese teacher in a Chinese restaurant in Rome, who was the first to demonstrate the powers that then I would become obsessed with, with these electric shocks and putting things on fire, and which, sort of a part of my early vision of like seizing these lightning bolts, and so on and so on. Anyway, so I found myself in Taiwan. That was sort of the first destination, and long story, and then Thailand, Nepal, China, India, and that is it. And then Asia for many years, and then sort of continue in a completely different direction, with Africa and Central and South America, and blah 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 blah.
So it seems like you were compelled to do it. You were compelled internally or spiritually for this to happen because of these visions at a young age.
There were barely some books about this stuff, so for sure it was not common knowledge as it is today.
Right.
Um,
and you seem to think that, or I guess I need to ask it as a question, then make a statement. Did you seem to think at that time, and as you were when you went to school and were in church, that it was Eastern monks, or were they, Roman Catholic monks,
very
Roman
clear.
Catholic
They
monks?
were, yeah, no, I mean, very clear. They were Asian. They were Asian men. I mean,
Okay.
that I would see as well. Logical at the time, I was very young, so I couldn't really tell the difference if it was a Chinese, a Thai, or a Mongolian, or whatever, right, or a Tibetan. Eventually became very, very clear, of course.
Right. Yeah.
I know, definitely Asian. I mean, definitely, again, this attraction that I had for this Chinese family and these Asian, kids in school and so on and so on, and many other little glimpses. No, for sure, I had these things with Asia.
Some describe you as like a wandering anthropologist of, I would say, somatic energy work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I never, I never saw myself as anything really. I mean, it was my own journey. I mean, I really did it for myself. You understand? And so everything else comes as the description of someone else about you, right? And then something just sticks, and okay, fine.
Maybe you can talk about one or two people that kind of transformed you, or developed things in you that led you then, or to other things, or developed a certain part of you.
Well, I mean, because of my grandmother military upbringing, the martial aspect of discipline and a certain sort of mindset, the military aspect of it, it was natural to me, right? Actually, the funniest thing is that the house where I grew up, we were literally across the street from a military base. So every morning at 7 o'clock, there was the trumpet that woke up, the bank of the army, blah, 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 and then it. My grandmother storming into the room and opening the windows, and first thing push-ups, and then pull-ups, and then cold shower. Right? Okay, that was my morning routine, and I would cry, but there was no way to skip that. Right? sometimes it was just the rope, and she would stand there and watch. Okay. So the martial art power, I guess they were like inbred in me, and so it came very natural. Okay, and probably my very first teacher of martial art was my grandmother, right? In that sense,
Right.
to a degree. And well, before anything else, I actually started judo when I was 5 or 6, I guess, because it was what was available in the school, right?
Mm.
And then I started training with this, Chinese family, and then again I found my second major teacher in this Chinese restaurant, and the teachings were, well, mostly Neigong, I mean Qigong Neigong, but his tradition was, he was like a Bagua master, and the drunken style. But he was a very, very skillful practitioner with fairly incredible abilities. I mean, the like of John Chang, and so, which at the time, it was really the only thing that I was interested about. I mean, for me, all the forms and everything were like, okay, if that's one is what I need to do to get there, I'll do it. But it also was a very first and immediate wake-up call, because he was an incredibly skilled martial artist and a great Negon master, but he was not a nice guy. I mean, I learned later, actually, is the reason why I left Taiwan, is because I understood that he was a hitman for the triads.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And so that was a very super quick wake up call, and remembering that, like, achieving power over these energies that lay dormant inside us, it's possible, but it's not spirituality. Okay, it's not something that is equated or in any way directly causative or even just correlated to finding love, becoming closer to God, or anyway, you understand, having some sort of a spiritual ascension. And so, since a very early age, I clearly saw there were sort of my visions of these, yogis and monastics, and then this early experience in martial arts that proved me that these energies within us are real, but developing these energies even to superhuman levels, to like fairy tale levels, has nothing to do with the quality of person that you are. And I found that one in the beginning, as a young man, was difficult to put these two things together, because there seemed to be a subconscious correlation between cultivating yourself and your energy and becoming a better person. Okay, and to the degree becoming, nobleman, or a saint, or somehow closer to God, and so I had to struggle for some time, because I was trying to make the two fit. Again and again and again, I found that it wasn't so. That I met a number of incredibly powerful wizards, magicians, Nagon masters, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, understand, best examples of human beings on many other,
Yeah.
sort of dimensions. So that was that, and but it didn't stop me from pursuing this tradition of the inner power, because I became fascinated that it was somehow rooted into Buddhism, and so I saw the connection with the monks, and my visions, and so I tried to build a thread line that say, well, something along the line got lost, but somehow this knowledge was born within a monastic tradition, within a monastic knowledge, with sort of a certain spiritual dimension around it, right? And so I pursue it as far as I could, and I think that Rene actually was present. There is a video. Actually, Rene was, I think, the first person that I passed this energy, this Qigong, this feel like a strong electric current, right?
Yeah, I've seen the video. Yeah.
And and well, sort of, I felt that I pushed it as much as I could, right? I pursue it. I reached my own personal record, my own personal success, what I determined to be success, and logically there was an high expectation that I would, you know, keep going, right? They said, well, you reach a threshold that is, not very easy to reach. It takes really quite a lot of dedication, and you need to have the right people around and the teachers, blah blah blah. So now that you reached it, keep going. And if you would have asked me 10 years earlier, that's the only thing that I would say. Yes, if I manage to get that, I will dedicate my life to just keep progressing, right? And instead, the day that I did it, I completely lost interest. And we had a conversation with Rene, like right after it, you know, that I was so completely disappointed
Right.
because nothing happened, nothing changed. Um, I always say, and it became a joke. I always say, how does it feel like, la la la. Well, I say it's like being constipated and trying to very hard to push and go to toilet. It just, and then suddenly this very uncomfortable jolt, starts in your
Right.
belly, genitals, and and goes up. There is nothing, pleasant or inherently mystical, so to speak,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So a couple of things I want to touch on in what you in
Yeah.
all that you just said so far. One is that you don't have to be a decent human being or humble or um, benevolent to be a monk, to be a doctor, to be a Qigong master, or to be a shaman. You could learn those skills, somebody, and still be a total asshole and a total bad person, because it has nothing to do with being spiritual, although spiritual people, I think more than others, tend to gravitate toward those practices. And why are you going to spend so much time in internal development? But you can just be someone who wants to have the powers to use to their advantage over others. So it's not
Well,
necessarily a spiritual thing,
well,
like you're saying.
the desire for power,
Right.
uh, it always implies a disempowerment within that has to be compensated in one way or another.
Yeah.
So whoever is searching for power, and this one goes on another whole level of conversation about the motivation of why you do what you do, why I did what I was doing. It's all another level of conversation. And the search for power is in itself a sign, a symptom of I believe, a disease within. And a disease, okay, not the disease in the sort of, there is something, okay, inside that is not okay. Conflict, trauma. And so the search for power is always a compensation for that. Always, always. I nowadays, after 30 plus years, I can tell you always without exception. So again, it's just a matter of having clear expectation. It's like Mike Tyson, all right, or many of the great boxers. They are incredible boxers, and you respect them and watch them and learn from them for their boxing skills, not necessarily for their other values as human beings. Many of them did terrible mistakes. They really damaged human beings, but great champions. Okay, and so the same with these power traditions. Okay, magic or alchemy or internal power or martial arts. as long as you are clear that it's just like watching Mike Tyson in his heyday, that you learn from them and you watch them perform for their skills, not for their values as human beings, then it's perfectly fine. It's like, in the 80s, people that were idolizing rock stars.
Right.
You go to the show because the guy is making a great concert, and great music. But the moment that you start to create a transferring of identity, okay, because you create a myth and you try to emulate that person, is a disaster, because that
Right.
person is a broken individual, right? So the separation between the skill and
Yeah.
the person
Yeah.
become very important to me. And logically, it's easy to say now because we are, grown up,
Yeah.
experienced, men. When you are young and in a search, it's difficult, right?
Right. You're
And
looking
even
for
when
heroes
someone
to
tells
emulate.
you, you don't really get it. Okay. So nowadays, for me, it's clear. I mean, I still enjoy watching some of these great performers. It's great, but you clearly don't expect them necessarily, because they can do something so good and so well, to necessarily be example to be taken for life, or for you, for your family,
Right.
for your children, or for yourself, right? So it's really simple. If you have that clear, no problem, go for it.
The media was coming down on one of our famous basketball players here in Philadelphia, Charles Barkley, for his bad behavior. And he said, I'm not a role model. I'm just a basketball player. Same thing, the same idea. I had a Kung Fu teacher when I was, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, who I found out was selling drugs in the school and sleeping with all the girl students. Just broke my heart. How could a Sifu do that? Well, he's young and naive. I mean, you don't have to be a moral person to learn the skills.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's beautiful when and if you meet someone who has both aspects.
Right.
For sure, it's beautiful. Then it becomes also a role model. Fantastic. But it's more in imagination than in reality that you find this.
Yeah.
Why? Because the person who is looking for and cultivating power is a broken person, is a person that is deeply damaged, traumatized inside. And so it's going to be difficult that he can actually be a role model, okay? Or he or she has to be someone that sort of went all around and, for whatever reason, solved his traumas and then still remained a warrior or a practitioner of the art. I never met those, honestly speaking. I mean, I have met people that when they actually resolved their inner demons and understood why they were craving for power, practicing power, using power, wielding power, they stopped. So that's the people that I met. I met people that once they understood what was driving them, stopped. And well, logically, you still have the mastery that you have acquired over a lifetime. So the fact that they stopped, it doesn't mean that they were not masters, because they have acquired that mastery. But without exception, all of those that actually became healthy individuals lost interest and stopped what they were doing. All of them, no exception of the one that I've met, and I've met over 100. So it's a,
Yeah.
small statistic, but it's still a statistic, right?
In the yoga writings, they say it is not to get attached to the cities. Don't
Yeah.
don't focus on those superpowers and skills. It'll just distract you and hold you. Get past them to the next level.
Yeah. Well, but it's like the question is actually deeper. The question is, if you are irrevocably attracted and irresistibly attracted to power, you have to take a very good look at yourself. and you need a teacher, because very often you by yourself you cannot, but you need a teacher that actually say, hey, there's something that you actually need to look at. And if you take a very good look at it and you have a teacher that brings you through a process of integrations, and so you don't even need to, oh my God, I'm tempted by the siddhis, I need to avoid them. No, you will just, they will lose their appeal, because once that damaged part of you it's integrated, okay, well then clearly your compass reorient and you understand, oh okay, that's my true north, and become effortless. And so I would say that if I may have a role for younger generation to counsel, is exactly in that delicate sort of segment where you can see a person that has potential, that is driven to the search, and to make them think, to make them question. Why do you do what you do? For whom you do what you do? Aside your expectation, what are your motivation? What are your intentions? And why do you have this motivation? From where they come from? And this is not something that is done in a week. This is something that you need to hammer to sometime for like a year, 2 years, 3 years before it actually really start to, shake something inside. I will always be grateful. My one of probably the 2 or 3 main teachers of my life, but I put him up there as the first. I mean, aside my grandmother, is in my Korean teacher, a Zen monk. And, he knocked pretty physically on my head for nearly 12 years, from when I first met him to when I actually understood. Nearly 12 years passed. Right. And everything that he was doing was just this. Why you do what you do? Why you're so attracted to this thing? Why? Who is so attracted to that? What for? Question deeply, create a deep doubt about what you are so certain about. All the reason you create for yourself, you have a perfect story set up, you have all the good reason why you do it, and why it's so good, and why it's so spiritual, why it will help you to grow toward God, and the steps of evolution. When I have more energy, I can do more, and blah, blah, blah. I know the old stories. Okay? It's like a drug addict. You have all the stories ready, and they make perfect sense. And to have a teacher that hammered down on the stories until the great doubt finally arrives, and you actually start to question and see through your own narrative, and then it crumbles. And then finally, the loom, the allure of power loses sense and meaning. It is the process of years, and I think that actually is the most important and fascinating process, that a teacher and a student, can create as a bond, right? Maybe not the only one, but for sure one of the most fascinating ones, because it's really the dynamic of the dark force and the light. Is you're always at the bivium. Who will you be? Where will you go? Right? And even if you believe that you're going in the right direction for the right reason, well, you are not.
Would you be interested in telling us the names of some of these teachers? Because you mentioned a few and haven't mentioned. Okay, we're good. No need.
Well, for one reason is because none of them, aside maybe 2, which are actually probably the only 2 that I would make name of, are on the internet, or maybe 3.
Right.
Okay. The rest are people, especially back then, that nobody knew. They had no schools, no fancy followers or anything, right?
Well, those are probably the best ones to learn from.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, nowadays, for sure, I definitely go and search those type. If I was young. But John Chang, the famous Magus of Java, it's one name. The other is Wan Liping. There is a book, Opening the Dragon Gate, The Making of a Modern Taoist Wizard, incredible Taoist teacher. Well, again, probably those two people would know. And then there was another one, Jiang Feng, that passed away already. Also, quite an interesting character, very controversial, but quite an interesting character. And most of the others, which are the ones that actually really influenced my life, nobody's, literally. I have nickname for them, Mr. Kim, nickname of my Korean teacher. The cook was another one.
Right.
And there were also some Christian mystics. I mean, I had a long conflicted love affair with Christianity because, again, I was raised in a atheist household, but I was raised also in parallel in a Christian church, and I had mystical experiences in the church. So logically, my grandmother was adamant to reject all the nonsense of the church, but I could not deny the mystical experiences that I was having while hearing this singing or while praying or whatever I was hearing and seeing inside myself. So these two were at odds. And so there was another interesting aspect and part of my journey where I really went quite deep into Christianity to find a peace between what I was experiencing of it and all the as my grandmother said, the nonsense of the church that had to be rejected. And it's interesting because she encouraged me to say, I don't understand what you experience, what you see, but I think is good. And from my very early stage, she always encouraged me, and that was important. And so when I undertook this journey to Christianity, led me in unexpected places of my own being, right? And I did meet some incredible Christian mystics, to the point that I redid all the baptism and the Pravoslava, the Orthodox tradition, and then I found a spiritual father, a great mystic, somebody with the kind of abilities and siddhis and powers that you would expect from the Asian mystics. And so he was actually one of the very few people that I actually saw levitating. Okay. Someone who didn't sleep or eat for like 40 years. Really incredible gift from the spirit, so to speak. And that led me to then have also quite interesting and prolonged retreats of prayer, and in several countries where this mystical aspect of Christianity is still kept. I ended up also having a few retreats in Athos mountain and in Ethiopia, and I have met some incredible mystics, that they have nothing to envy to the greatest yogi or monks in Asia, right? And in the discernment of the essence and the dogma, I found something very precious in Christianity. And then, sort of I went and look at that same precious essence in Islam, especially in Sufism. Less, but I had a quick look also at the Jewish tradition in the. And so it was also an important part of making peace with this Abrahamic religious background that willing or unwilling, I was born into, and most of us in the West are, again, willing or unwilling, you are influenced by it. And I think that it was very important because it also, clarified that you don't necessarily need to go to Asia and search necessarily exotic things that are very foreign, far away. Genuine spirituality, of course, not martial arts and inner power and this kind of stuff, but genuine spirituality actually does exist in the very premise of our civilization, of our culture, and there are still keepers of it, right? And it was interesting because the keepers of our spiritual tradition are very much more in line with the ideal that we subconsciously created of a spiritual person. So I found them actually much closer to our ideal than the Asian counterpart, right? And so you actually do find examples of ethics and morals and genuine sort of spirituality as we may understand it, rather than in many of these internal power masters, shamans or martial artists in Asia, right? And it was also very important the person is at the center of everything. It's not these or that, Qigong, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, I don't know, whatever, shamanism, Christianity or Islam, but it's the person. How well and deeply they have understood, how successfully they have resolved their inner conflicts, their inner traumas, how well they have integrated their identities and their personalities, and how true they are to themselves, rather than being, hiding and two faces, where they need to keep the form from outside because it's expected of them, but then they never integrated their personas.
It's very important generally for people to know that these traditions are still in Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity, because here all we hear about are the horrific behaviors, among the priests with children. And it's like, again, back to what you were saying earlier, was you can be a bad person and still be in religion, but not be really spiritual or moral. I mean, the same thing with martial arts. You want to do it to be a bully, make yourself feel superior to others, and have nothing to do with, becoming, facing your demon, right? Unmasking yourself. Yeah. I had an acquaintance who's, I did some work with him, and he was a Taoist priest. And he said, we went out to lunch, and he said, I'm publicly vegan, but I'm going to have a cheeseburger today. And I'm just so your persona is that of a Taoist priest, but actually you're just a regular guy putting on a costume, right?
So 90% what happens, right?
Yeah,
I always saw, thanks God, I always saw through that. I never fell for it. I really never fell for that.
It's crazy, but the Taoist.
I just speak on something that you said because, of course, again, my grandmother was always, all these priests are pedophiles and, la la la, So again, I was raised in this school, but every time I come home, I was like brainwashed, in a positive way.
Right.
So, but it's interesting because, logically, when I arrived in Asia and I had the pink glasses on, because okay, finally I'm home. I am into the home of my visions, all the people here that I saw and la la la. And I arrived with the pink glasses, that they all would be, amazing and holy and la la la. And then I told you I had this experience with this teacher, which I understand was a hitman. And and then very quickly I understood that everywhere is the same. It's like if you go to in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, whatever, Nepal, Tibet, I mean, it's like daily on the newspapers, scandals of monks harassing children or whatever. The same.
It's the
The
human
same.
condition.
It well,
People have problems, and they hide in religion.
It's very simple. Here it's a whole another level of the conversation, which is really what became for me more interesting. Is the psychological dimension of what we call spirituality. And of course it's very simple. It's like what you oppress and repress, it doesn't disappear. It just becomes more ugly and come back with another head or 10 other heads. So this whole thing of twisting sexuality in the name of some kind of a spiritual idea, which you find in Asia as well as in the West. Okay, let's be very honest here. It yields the same results. It yields, well, broken, twisted people. And there is just no sweet way to put it, right? I had my own struggle with it, because as a young man, it's like you do all this exercise and trainings. Well, all the more you have a lot of libido and sexual energy, and you want to have sex all the time, But then it's like, oh no, if you have sex, you lose energy, or something along the lines, your chakras close, and something around the nonsense, your chi is lost in every ejaculation. And it's like, and as a young man growing up, I went through that phase where for one moment too long, I believed in all these lies and bullshits, right? And so I was like paranoid. It's like, oh my God, I cannot have sex. I need to celibate and practice, or if I have sex, I need to whatever, don't ejaculate and circulate my energy. And so I went through all that phase of just insanity and madness, right? Believing that it was real and good and true, okay, because there was somebody that was parroting it and making some very smart face when he was telling that story, right?
Well, the master didn't want the student sleep with his daughter, so he said no sex.
Oh man, but it was very liberating.
Yeah.
I arrived in India, of all places, which is a very sexually repressed country, actually. But you always, again, it's the person that matters, not the culture or the tradition. You always have to find, the person, just the person. I met this old tantric, the guru, right? Who lived as a layman, no fancy robes and so forth and so on, but an accomplished tantric practitioner, also with some fairly interesting abilities himself, right? And he was quite old, but always surrounded by these, much younger ladies, many of them foreigners. If you know India, you know that it's rare to see foreign women with Indian men in general, and it's just is so difficult in that culture, the whole issue of man-women relationship, sexuality, whatever the case, right? And the guy was, I don't know, old, 70s, 80s, I don't know exactly, but old. And he was so always energetic, drinking quite a lot of whiskey and smoking, quite intensely. And his siddhis, his abilities, were impressive, And I always take John Chang as sort of a reference because people have read the book or saw videos. So that's what I mean, right? That level. And and one day I go to him very frustrated, and I say, Guruji, tell me please, I've been twisting my nuts and having non-ejaculatory sex and retaining my energy, circulating, doing celibacies, because to cultivate this inner power, I was told that, you you need to do so, right? And then because you really have a kind of a confirmation bias. Then the time that actually you have a little too much sex, so you have one or two ejaculation more, you feel depleted and empty, and you check your pulses and your chi is weak, right?
That's right.
So you have a confirmation bias, which is crazy, right? And the guy, look at me and says, I will tell you a secret. I don't know if you know how Indian guys talk. So.
Yeah.
That is all nonsense. And so he told me the story of how he acquired these siddhis. And this one opened a whole very interesting topic of conversation. So he was in his mid-50s, a typical middle-age crisis, losing his eyesight, balding off, and getting fat, and his happiness stick didn't work anymore, and a terrible marriage, classical picture. And so he resorted to go with sort of young prostitutes, which again in India and in many places in Asia, it's customary. For us in the West now, it's like, oh my God, it's terrible. It's just culture for thousands of years, right? Whatever the case. And so he tells me that he finds himself in this shabby kind of brother room, but it's India, of course. And so even in the shabby brother room, there is a picture of Shiva on the wall, right? Of course, right. And so he's there doing his business, and and in the moment he finishes, he comes for one moment. He's looking at the picture of Shiva.
He turned blue.
I kid you not. Okay, he's telling me the story. It's just totally hilarious. He's looking at the picture of Shiva, and in a moment he says, I give you all. I keep nothing. I surrender. I just let go. I mean, it was like, of course, a very painful moment. He realized what he was doing. He was disgusted on himself, so it was not an happy moment, okay? But in that moment, he really, looked at Shiva, whatever, and says, and he claims that his power woke up, over the next, whatever, months or so without doing anything. And why? Because he emptied himself. And with that ejaculation, he completely emptied himself. His ahamkara, his identification, his ego, his everything. So that he could be finally filled with Shakti, which was, the young girl he was having sex with. Okay. And that is it. That's his practice. When I ask him, what is your practice? Everyday sex, try to ejaculate at least once a day, better twice a day, and make yourself empty. The more empty you are, the more you're going to be filled with Shakti. And it's the Shakti that operates through you, and all the powers are Shakti. All the siddhis are because of the Shakti. And that is it. And so here I was with a man that I thought would teach me some secret practices to wake up my abilities, right? And his main practice that he practiced, and when I met him in his, again, must have been in his 80s, okay, sharp intellect, colorful, skinnier and pretty sinewy, and still having a lot of sex and keeping to his sadhana, to his practice, which was to ejaculate as often as possible and empty yourself as much as possible to then be filled with Shakti.
Wow.
I mean, I now make the story like this. Of course, he had his whatever, liturgies, his rituals, the Shiva and the different, whatever, gods and the Shaktis, blah, blah, blah. But practically what he was doing was that. And it was such a wake-up call for me. In the beginning, I thought that he lied to me. He said, you're making fun of me. You're kidding me. And no. Wow. He was actually meaning what he was saying. And, well, well, let me tell you that, that revelation changed my life.
Oh, I've heard the stories. No, kidding.
And,
But
and I still live by that, you know. It's like,
yeah,
oh, people still tell me. I never understood when people say that sex makes you weak. No, sex
right.
makes you athletic, you know, and coming fills you up. And because I believe what you told me, so now I'm
Now you're
living it.
super. So that's how you became a superhuman. Anybody who can ejaculate 14 times a week is a superhuman. You know?
You know, and and uh, and this one bring me to a thread of the conversation,
Yeah.
which we didn't touch, and I think is important because it was important for me, and it was part of the journey. Let me give it to you in a nutshell. So you are educated to believe that a spiritual practice or a spiritual whatever sadhana practice, especially, but not only, but let's say especially if covered to the development of abilities, so cultivating chi, energy, kundalini, yogic practices, okay, it is a kind of a gradual step path where you learn some exercise, you master it, you move on to the next, and that there is the powerful belief that just like this routine of internal martial arts, they should unlock some power inside you. You believe that repeating these mental formulas, visualization, circulating the energy in one channel or another or whatever, they have the power to unlock certain abilities, and that it's impossible to access and grow these abilities without
Yeah.
these practices. Well, this gentleman in India was probably the first that cracked this belief in me. And then I made it a point to actually search for people that develop exactly that type of ability that I was interested in without any 30 years of cultivating their tantien, circulating their energy, stabilizing the Shen, or meditating or else. And guess what? I met quite a few of them.
Mm.
People that through extremely random circumstances, without ever knowing what a chakra or a tantien is or practice is, they just develop or activated these abilities. Well, I tell you, that was another very big wake-up call. Because not only is not dependent on you ejaculating or not ejaculating, menstruating or not menstruating, but more than that, it's actually not even really connected with you doing some practices or not. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that's incredible. So specifically for the skill of the famous yin and gong, this kundalini, this electric like, oh, you need to do this, that. Well, guess what? I have met at least two people that I know of, okay, personally, actually three, that never did any practice, okay, and have awoken this ability. How do you explain that? Right. And so this one then put into perspective again, we come back to motivation and intention. Why you do what you do, right? And understanding that putting yourself to the hardship of a training, it can shape your character, it create discipline, it has certain health benefits, maybe. And also that one is another very big kind of dubious question if it really does any health benefit, but whatever. Let's just say the physical training benefit out of it. And then other than that, it's all very kind of not clear. Is it really what you need or what you need to do to become actually a spiritual person, a better person, a well integrated human being? Well, no, it's not proven that doing these practices really does that. And do you really need these practices in the hope of achieving some supernatural ability, which whenever you have the little bug in the back of your head, that subconscious thought that, yeah, I'm doing it because I want to be spiritual, but subconsciously you crave the power. And so you actually do it because you hope that you're going to have the gift, the benefit, the reward at the end. Also that one, it doesn't really, work in this way in such a linear manner, right? Well, yes, you can say that maybe if you do certain exercises for certain type of practices, you can reproduce certain effects and results. But it's not guaranteed. It's not like a linear path. You have 1,000 people doing the same breathing practice, the same form, and developing nothing. And you have someone that maybe does, but then did he really activate that ability because he was doing that or for something else? And you can't really clearly determine enough this. So when you start to look at these things with enough depth and enough perspective, the house of cards fall apart. There is very little that you actually can base yourself on and base your faith or or the reason and the motivation, intention of you doing certain practices for.
In terms of enlightenment, there's people who have instant enlightenment with no training and no nothing, and there's people who it takes decades and decades and decades of practice or of meditating, and other people meditate 40 years and never reach it. Same thing with chi powers for healing or something.
Good.
Then I wonder if it's something about being humble and empty, and the ego is sitting back for a minute so something can come forward, because all of this thinking of gaining power is ego based. All of this, I'm going to train this and be with this lineage and this many skills in this art, and then I'm going to get a certificate, and that's all ego based. So maybe it's something to do with the dropping of the ego momentarily, and it can happen at any time. So let's hang on to this for a minute. So you went out, you spent a lot of time with teachers who went through a lot of decades of practice and cultivation, right? First, so Kung Fu masters, Qigong, Neigong masters, yogis, pranayama, etc. On and on and on. Sitting in temples, meditating.
Many Buddhists, Hindus to a degree
Right.
less, many Buddhists. And so it is the same. It's like in Buddhist monastery, the Dalai Lama said something as half a joke, half seriously. Many years ago, I remember it. He said, well, not everybody that wears a gown or a robe is necessarily really a monk.
Right.
And it's the same thing like the Christian monks. It's like, look, I spend enough time with the Buddhist teacher, both, from all tradition, Theravada, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and so forth and so on, right? Tantric, Dzogchen, and it's totally the same. It's like 90+%, they're just, guys in a funny dress. Are they really spiritual people? No, they are not. They are full of cravings and unfulfilled desires and frustrations. And in the monastery, it's horrible. It's, and I stayed in many of these kind of, monasteries. It's full of gossips and little jealousies and pettiness and whatever, right? So it's everywhere is the same, because the human psyche is the same. And so it boils down to those few individuals that really create an order, consciously or unconsciously, by following certain steps, manage to create an order into their psyche and integrate their identities and their personalities. But this process is more random than what you would think so, because doing the practice and the ritual and the practice and the ritual, which should help you in the process of ordering your psyche is only 30% of the work. Because again, otherwise every person in a monastery, Christian or Buddhist or Hindu, would be a saint, and it's not so, right? And so there is a 70% that actually is something else, and that something else, after many years, I understood what is it. Well, is the person, the individual, and the relationship with the teacher, because it's in the relationship that you grow, is in the relationship that there is an education, is in the relationship where 70% of the magic happen, that creating that order in your psyche. And for that you need an accomplished teacher that is himself an accomplished individual, not necessarily an accomplished monks that knows a lot of mantras and formulas. Because trust me, I met many lamas that knows all the formulas, received all the empowerments, the initiation, and they are not one step closer to Buddhahood than you and I.
Right. So that makes it very difficult when we're talking about maybe 1% of spiritual and skilled people of internal work.
Yeah.
That may be of a level that is genuine and of a Buddha nature, for example.
Well, I mean, but again, genuine. We started a conversation.
Yeah.
If you are just looking at the skills, you can find a lot of genuine teachers that really have skills. That's great. If you are looking at the spiritual, psychological integration of the individual, which we as Westerners, really have as that archetype of the wise man or of the spiritual person, then it's rare.
Right.
Again, I speak of basic integration of identity and personality, because spirituality is another of the sketchy word that doesn't mean anything. Nothing. Just nothing at all. What does it mean, spirituality? That you meditate 10 hours a day? Well, yes, I told you. I met a lot of monks and yogis that meditate 15 hours a day. They are still, very unintegrated human beings. So what does it mean to be spiritual? To have a nice turban, to put the incense stick and do pranam and being vegetarian? I met also many of those. And trust me, again, it doesn't necessarily make them, wholesome, integrated human beings. So that's why, for me, this word, it's a very dangerous word, because everybody put into it whatever they project into it. Yeah. But then when we try to really sort it out, what actually does it mean? It's again very cloudy and really hard to define, because mostly it's a projection of an archetypal idealization that you, me, and us as a civilization put into that, right? And so, because we are the civilization that we come from, when we say a spiritual realization, let's be honest, you are talking of, the idealized version of the Jesus Christ, that it's always sweet and kind, never angry and gentle, and the kind of floating midair, and full of love and never angry, and just goodness all around. So, and that's a fact. We subconsciously, when we think of a spiritual ideal, we think of that goodness, of that love that knows no hatred, no anger, no revenge, and that it's equal for everyone. But that doesn't exist, because the Jesus that then you actually go and read in the Gospels is a very different Jesus, very hot-tempered, angry very often. All right. and I have never seen these in any of the monks, Christians or Buddhists or Hindus. So we have to then reset the projection of the archetype of what means spirituality and match it with, first of all, reality. And second, we have to then rebuild what actually means the definition. What for yourself, I don't even now claim culturally, but just for the individual. What do you mean with that? Build that archetype, describe it clearly to yourself, because you are actually describing who you want to become. And then work in becoming and embodying that archetype that you yourself describe for yourself. Don't look for it out there in other people, because it doesn't exist. It's a projection. But if you can describe it to yourself, what for me means to be spiritual, to be spiritually accomplished, spiritually realized, well, describe it in the most minute details, and then live by it day by day to try to, approach it, knowing that probably you will never approach it 100%, but in the getting closer to it is the journey and is the satisfaction.
You stopped those a lot of your practices and searching when you understood that one, they're mostly the same, two, it's about the individual, and three, you need a good teacher. What was it after that you were hoping or striving for in your journeys beyond those cities or those skills? What was it that you were looking for that you realized you weren't finding?
It's a very good question, because it comes back to defining for myself, and that's the invitation that I have for you and for people now. Define for yourself, what is it for you spirituality? What actually does it mean for you when you think of the embodiment of spirituality? Well, describe it in the most minute details that you can, and work to embody it, and don't expect anyone but yourself to be that. So sorry if I come back, on this one, but I think that it's probably is the message that I really want to give today in this talk, right? Because it's an exercise that people don't do, and I invite you, after we finish to speak, do it, just pen and paper, and for the next few days, maybe a month, just keep adding to that vision of what does it mean to be spiritual. How does it look like? Everything. Okay, what is it? And the more you make it real and clear here, the more you understand a lot of nonsense and kind of idiosyncrasies and paradoxes and just non-real things that you had in your mind. And by finally, for the first time, make it clear, you discard what is not, and actually for the first time, you can tell to yourself what is. And then from there, you go back and you say, okay, what do I need to become this person? What do I need to make this happen? What did I do that helped me? What did I do or I'm doing that is not helping, or is just redundant and useless, like, lighting an incense, right? For example, I don't know, maybe for somebody it's useful, I don't know. So for yourself, you have to find it out. And then you see what's left. What do I need to do to become and embody that? And then from there, the next phase of your journey really begin. Because then you start to question everything that you did or that you do or that you want to do, and you start to sieve it through this filter. And you say, okay, does it match this? Does it help to go toward there? What proof do I have that doing this will help me to achieve what I, designed or determined to be, what for me means to be spiritual or spirituality, right? So please take time and do this exercise, pen and paper. You have to have it clear, and only then you can start to think of the practices, routines, rituals, exercises, belief systems that can help you, behavioral patterns that can help you to become that. So, I turned your question around, okay, really. And because that's the process that I have done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So after looking, and you understand that the Buddha is not outside, and doesn't matter how perfect the teacher is, you will always find, the projected imperfection, because it's what you see, is what you project, because it's your idea of what it means to be spiritual. And so you project that on him, poor person, because probably in his or her version, it's a different idea. And so, they don't necessarily, match, maybe in general line, yes. And so that's really what I did for myself. I stopped measuring the person out there, and I started to define for myself what it meant, what it means. Okay. And I come up with my set of rules, of ideas, of laws, of determining factors, you understand, of axioms, of whatever you want. And then based on that, protocols, way of living, the choices, the practices, that I tried, and I know that they support that. If they don't support that, cast them off. Waste of time. Irrelevant. It doesn't matter which culture, which tradition, which lineage, doesn't matter. Maybe you realize after you have clearly defined what it means for you, maybe you realize that to become that and embody that, you don't need any of the practices you have learned from any lineage. And maybe you need something completely different. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, that's that could be shocking. But you will not know until you don't clearly define what is it.
Right.
And I did this for myself, over, quite a long period of time. And then finally I was free from expecting or looking the teacher to be perfect and to embody and to, or whatever, to open the way for me.
So when you do that, though, I'm imagining that you're still retaining 1, 2, or 3 practices of some sort, right? Because there's things that support your vision of your spirituality.
Of course.
Yeah.
And that's what I say. You have to, after you define it, you have to, go through your arsenal and understand, right? And so what I found and what I use is it's for me. So logically, it wouldn't benefit anyone else that didn't do the exercise for themselves, you understand? And also, what I found is that, I had my toolkit to match what I defined to be my understanding and goal. And both my definition and understanding changed over the past 10 years. Okay. And my toolkit also changed. So, now I come to this definition and I work by selecting the best tools I can to help me to get close, to approximate that to the best of my abilities. All right, well, then quite interesting, after I am very close or I am nearly the perfect mirror of what the definition was, then maybe something happened. Maybe your definition changed and maybe the tools that you need change. And so you need to redefine what's your, the fine tuning, you understand? And so this process, nowadays I like to believe that that's it, that the definition and the tools that I have is the final version, but I cannot know. It would be presumptuous, to say, oh, that is it. I think it is now, but I don't know. Okay. And so, be also open to that.
So somebody who's coming into this, say they're a teenager, 20s, 30s, and they've had some kind of event that leads them toward seeking spirituality of some kind, or they want to break out of the religious tradition they're in and become more spiritual. And they don't have a background of sitting in monasteries and doing Qigong and martial arts and meditating in caves. How do you advise people to start once, if they're using this advice of determining what this is for them? Can you advise newcomers or people who are kind of stuck to kind of look at different things to find a pathway forward toward that if they don't have the experience to know? You had 30 years of experience to do it, to work from, to say how you want to be and become and strive toward. But new students, they're like, okay, there's a karate class here. They have a meditation at the community center. I'll try that. There's a Buddhist temple in Chinatown. I mean, it's quite hard to know without getting then caught in those traps or knowing if that's the right path for you. So
that's the luxury of the relation with the teacher,
yeah,
the guide, the mentor. And unluckily, is not available for everyone. It's a sad reality.
yeah.
So either you are lucky enough to find the door and knock on the door and find the person that can even just simply guide you into this basic process. Or otherwise you have to try your best, make your trials and errors and fall and rise again and hope for the best.
Yeah.
I really don't have an easy answer. I don't really have a comforting answer from that. I mean, I can tell people come and look for me, but how many people? I'm only one. How many people? I cannot sit. I could, but it's still not the call of my life to just sit from morning to evening, receiving the queue of people looking for that. It's a beautiful kind of call. I'm not there yet. Maybe I will. So maybe I will be more available. At the moment, I'm still not, but maybe I will. So I can only say, if people listen to this conversation or other conversations, take out of it what you can. Really think hard on what we discussed and strive, to the very best of your ability to become what you could be. But you have to clarify to yourself. Don't leave it into this undefined cloud. You have to clarify for yourself. In the picture of understanding what for you is spirituality, what does it mean to be spiritual, and defining yourself into it and working into that direction. There is really no preference. No preference. Only one thing only that I may say. Practices that have been tested for thousands of years are probably better, much better than concocted new age channeled inspiration or something like this. Yes. Only thing is, doesn't matter what you choose, just please choose something and someone that has a background and a practice that has been tried and tested for the past thousands of years, where there is a history of people that by doing this prayer, meditation, exercises, they have developed, not necessarily their character or their enlightened nature, but at least they have developed a set of mental and physical skills. Then maybe among those people, you will also find some exceptional individuals that are also, great beings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if enlightened, but at least, really integrated human beings. That, yes, if you are a young person, try to find practices that have a history, that have a background. Okay, absolutely.
Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed our first installment of 4 in conversation with David Verdesi, the spiritual anthropologist. Please leave your comments below. Ask questions. David's very happy to answer. I'm happy to answer. Please also hit the like button if you like the video. Please subscribe to the channel and share this video with others who you think may enjoy it. Thank you so much.